Order. Today we are marking the 80th anniversary of the destruction of the House of Commons chamber by the Luftwaffe during what was the biggest air raid on London of the Second World War. This morning, the Lord Speaker and I laid wreaths at the memorial in Westminster Hall in memory of the 3 members of staff who lost their lives that night. On the way into the chamber today, my procession paused at the entrance arch to commemorate the raid. Colleagues will know that Winston Churchill ordered that the arch be retained in its bomb-damaged state as an enduring reminder of the ordeal Westminster suffered during the war. We remember those who gave their lives to defend this place and all it represents, and thank friends and allies from across the Commonwealth who helped rebuild what was lost. This renewed chamber will always remain a symbol of resilience of democracy in the face of adversity. As colleagues will know, the chair of the Backbench Business Committee is elected each session. Nominations are open now and will close at 5 p.m. on Tuesday, the 18th of May. Nomination forms are available from the Vote Office, on the internet or by emailing the Public Bill Office. And what I would say that is pbohawk@parliament.uk. Candidates need the support of no fewer than 10 members from the party representing government and no fewer than 10 members from the party not representing government or from no party. Only members from a party not representing government may be candidates. If a ballot is necessary, I will announce the arrangements in due course. Order. Mark Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that Mr. Speaker do issue his warrant to the Clerk of the Crown to make out a new writ for the electing of a member to serve in this present Parliament for the county constituency of Chesham and Amersham in the room of Dame Cheryl Elise Kendall Gillen, deceased.
The question is that I do issue my warrant to the Clerk of the Crown to make out a new writ for electing of a member to serve in the present Parliament for the county constituency of Chesham and Amersham in the room of Dame Cheryl Elsie Kendall Gillen, deceased. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to the urgent question. I call Layla Moran to ask the urgent question. Layla Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State of Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs if he will make a statement on the violence in Israel and Palestine.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the recent escalation in violence in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories is deeply concerning. It is the worst violence seen there for several years. As the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary have made clear, this cycle of violence must stop and every effort must be made to avoid the loss of life, especially that of children. The UK offers our deepest condolences to the families of those civilians killed. Civilian deaths, both in Israel and Gaza, are a tragedy. We urge all sides to refrain from any kind of provocation so that calm is restored as quickly as possible. As we enter the final days of the holy month of Ramadan, restoration of peace and security is in everyone's interest. The UK will continue to support that goal. The UK unequivocally condemns the firing of rockets at Jerusalem and other locations in Israel. We strongly condemn these acts of terrorism from Hamas and other terrorist groups, who must permanently end their incitement and rocket fire against Israel. There is no justification for any targeting of civilians. Israel has a legitimate right to self-defense and to defend the citizens from attack. In doing so, it is vital that all actions are proportionate, in line with international humanitarian law, and make every effort to avoid civilian casualties. Violence against peaceful worshippers of any faith is unacceptable. The UK has been clear that the attacks on worshippers must stop. The status quo in Jerusalem is important at all times, but especially so during religious festivals, such as Ramadan. Our priority now must be an immediate de-escalation on all sides and an end to civilian deaths. As I made clear over the weekend, we are concerned about tensions in Jerusalem linked to threatened evictions of Palestinian families from their homes in Sheikh Jarrah. That threat is allayed for now, but we urge Israel to cease such actions, which in most cases are contrary to international humanitarian law. The UK continues to support international efforts to reduce the tension. The Foreign Secretary delivered a message of de-escalation in a call to the Israeli Foreign Minister yesterday and will speak to the Palestinian Prime Minister shortly. I have spoken to the Israeli Ambassador and the Palestinian Head of Mission in the UK to urge them to de-escalate and to restore calm. The UK is also engaged at the UN Security Council, calling for all sides to make measures to reduce further violence and making clear our deep concern at the violence at the holy sites in Jerusalem. I am sure the Security Council will continue to monitor the situation closely and is due to reconvene. UK embassies throughout the Middle East are engaging with regional partners, and we remain in close contact with the US administration and our European allies. The situation on the ground over the last few days demonstrates the urgent need to make progress towards peace. The UK remains committed to a two-state solution as the best way to bring peace and stability to the region. I repeat again, we urge all sides to show maximum restraint and refrain from taking actions which endanger civilians and make a sustainable peace more difficult.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ibrahim al-Masri, 11. Marwan al-Masri, 6. Rahaf al-Masri, 10. And Yazan al-Masri, aged just 2. These are some of the names of the children killed this week, and last night an Israeli child was added to their numbers. My heart breaks for them. And Mr. Speaker, my heart bleeds for Palestine, for Jerusalem, the city of my family, for the worshippers attacked by extremists at the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the holiest night of Ramadan, and for all innocent civilians, Israeli and Palestinian. We cannot allow this to escalate any further. The Israeli government, pursuing evictions in Sheikh Jarrah that would be illegal under international humanitarian law, including the 4th Geneva Convention, and the subsequent overly aggressive reaction of the Israeli authorities that injured hundreds, has ignited a tinderbox. And Hamas then retaliated, and those strikes must be condemned too, because violence only begets more violence. The UN Special Envoy last night warned that the situation is escalating towards a full-scale war. The minister will know that he does not say such words lightly, and he refers not just to Israel-Palestine, but indeed the entire region. So my questions to the minister are these. Will the UK back Security Council resolutions condemning these attacks, regardless of what the US does? And should that fail, will the minister work with international partners like the European Union to issue a statement on de-escalation in the strongest possible terms today, now? What steps is the UK taking to stop the attempted illegal evictions in Sheikh Jarrah? And will the government commit to supporting a new round of peace negotiations and indeed new elections in Palestine? And finally, if this isn't the time to recognise the state of Palestine, then when is? Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom has a historic responsibility to the people of Palestine and a fundamental obligation to uphold international law. That two-state solution, as promised to the likes of my family, is as elusive as ever. It is time for the government to not just say, but do.
Mr. Speaker, I recognise the passion with which the Honourable Lady speaks and her personal connection to both Jerusalem and the region. I can assure her that the United Kingdom will work with international partners, both bilaterally and through multilateral institutions, to encourage an end to the violence and conflict, which does nobody any good. We all mourn. We all feel the deepest sympathy and condolences for those who have lost children and loved ones, whether they be in Gaza or in Israel. And it is in everybody's interests to de-escalate, and we will work with our regional partners, as I say, as well as the leadership of the Palestinian Authority and Israel to work towards de-escalation. The rocket attacks coming from Gaza cannot be justified, and we call upon them to cease immediately as part of that de-escalation.
We now come to Jameson.
Mr. Speaker, over the past week, Hamas is alleged to have fired over 1,000 rockets at indiscriminate targets inside Israel. By the same token, Israeli aggression has also escalated. Does my honourable friend agree that we must press in this place for both sides to return to direct peace talks, and also that the targeting of civilians against international law is abhorrent? We have spoken with both Israel and with the Palestinian Authority to work with them to de-escalate and bring about peace. He mentions the avoidance of civilian casualties. We press for that as a priority in all instances, and we will continue to work both with parties in the region and in multilateral forum, the United States and the European Union most perhaps closely, to push for peace, so that we don't have to hear of any more fatalities in either Gaza or in Israel.
Let's go to Shadow Minister Wayne David. Wayne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like everyone else in this House, I have been appalled by what we have seen in Jerusalem, Gaza, and Israel. The loss of life has been terrible, and my heart goes out to the families who have lost loved ones. The Labour Party strongly condemns the indiscriminate firing of over 1,000 rockets by Hamas. And I also strongly condemn Israeli actions that have killed Palestinian civilians. Israel and the Palestinians generally must do everything possible to de-escalate the situation. And I would urge the government to do all it can to prevent further conflict. The violence must stop now. Once this terrible violence is ended, we must ensure that the root causes of the violence are recognised and addressed. The eviction of Palestinians from their homes in East Jerusalem must end. International law must be upheld, and all religious sites must be respected. At the same time, Britain and the international community must recognise the commitment to a two-state solution. Will the government commit to doing this?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman highlights a number of areas where the UK's policy is long-standing, particularly with regard to settlements and evictions, issues which I've discussed a number of times from this dispatch box. The UK government will continue to work towards peace in the immediate instance to bring about the end to this particular violence, but in the longer term to secure a meaningful, peaceful, prosperous two states. That remains the UK's policy, and we will continue to work to bring that about.
Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister will know how deeply shocked many of my constituents in Gloucester and across the land are by the extraordinary images this week during Ramadan of the Israeli Defence Force effectively attacking the Al-Aqsa Mosque, centre of Islamic worship in Jerusalem for hundreds of years. And although the rocket attacks by Hamas from Gaza are completely indefensible, it's clear that a major cause for the increased discontent is the number of illegal evictions from Sheikh Jarrah. So will my right honourable friend confirm today that the government will ask Israel to cease immediately any further illegal evictions from East Jerusalem and to respect the sanctity of mosques? For without both of these steps, surely an already fragile situation can only deteriorate further.
With regard to the holy sites in Jerusalem, which is the home of some of the holiest sites for all three Abrahamic religions, our position is that the status quo must be maintained and those religious sites must be respected. Obviously, many people would have been very distressed by the images that we've seen from the region. We will continue to
we will continue to speak directly with our contacts in the Israeli government about evictions and settlements, and as I say, our position on that has been long-standing, and I've spoken about that issue from the dispatch box, and we call upon Hamas to immediately cease its indiscriminate rocket attacks into Israel, and we call upon all actors in this to bring about peace so that we don't see any more fatalities and casualties.
SNP spokesperson Alan Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'd congratulate the Honourable Member for bringing this very urgent issue to the House. The SNP condemns all violence, whoever perpetrates it and whoever it is perpetrated against. We send our deepest condolences to the innocents who have been caught up in this dreadful, dreadful conflict. We're a friend of Palestine, we're a friend of Israel also, but above all else, we stand foursquare behind international law. And I'd suggest it's through that prism that we need to look at this latest flashover of a long-simmering injustice. So I've got two particular points for the Minister, and I agree with much of the tone and sentiment of his statement. I think it's worth stressing the unity of this House in this situation. But surely now is the time to recognise Palestine. That would give an impetus to the two-state solution. And settler goods, by their very definition, are illegal. The UK should not be trading in them. And if we won't ban them into our presence, can we not at least label them as such so that consumers can make a choice? Because we do have influence within the State of Israel, which is a deeply complex place. And the government is not, the Israeli government is not entirely in charge of events, but we do have influence. Warm words, however sincere, won't cut it, Mr Speaker. Now's the time for action. Thank you.
I thank the honourable gentleman for the comments he's made about the tone of this debate, and I agree with him on that. Our priority at the moment, and I understand the points he makes about the timing of recognition and long-standing conversations about goods coming from Israel. And whilst those issues are well worthy of debate, our priority at the moment is to bring about peace. We are focused relentlessly on that. That will be the UK government's priority, working with international partners to bring about a resolution to the current conflict. Other wider issues, I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to debate in this place and others in the future.
Speaker, many in Dudley South are shocked at the scenes from Al-Aqsa Mosque and a police response that does not appear to be proportionate. Does my honourable friend agree that a lasting two-state solution requires both sides to feel secure, and that means a stop to the stream of rocket attacks from Hamas, restraint from Israeli forces and the wider population, and a reconsideration of the evictions and settlements policy by the Israeli government and courts?
The policing of Jerusalem and the holy sites within Jerusalem are always a sensitive issue, particularly so during religious festivals like Ramadan. And we have and we will continue to call for restraint in the policing of those areas. As I say, our position on settlements and evictions is long-standing, but ultimately I do agree with my honourable friend that a two-state solution is the best chance for a sustainable peace in the region, and that's what we'll continue to work towards.
Right, let's go to Lillian Greenwood. Lillian.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My constituents have watched with growing anxiety, anger and frankly horror at the spiralling events in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. The threat of forcible evictions and demolitions, restrictions on Palestinians entering the city of Jerusalem and violence against worshippers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque have all inflamed tensions, and we now see a terrifying escalation with Hamas rocket attacks and Israeli airstrikes, both killing and injuring innocent Israeli and Palestinian civilians. Both are unacceptable and both must end. But does the Minister agree that if proper accountability and the rule of law had been followed in the past, we might not be where we are today? And what steps will he take now to ensure that the Israeli government adheres to international law, ends the evictions, ends the discriminatory planning laws and ends the construction of illegal settlements?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, as I have said, the UK's position on settlements and evictions is long-standing. We've communicated that both from the dispatch box and directly with our interlocutors in the Israeli government. But ultimately, as I say, our priority at the moment is to do everything we can, both bilaterally and through the multilateral institutions, to bring about an end to this conflict. So the terrible images, the terrible and distressing images that she and others in this chamber have spoken about come to an end, and then we can work on a long-term, sustainable, peaceful solution for the region.
Let's go to Crispin Blunt. Crispin.
If my right honourable friend examines his statements today and compares them to those made by the Foreign Office 25 years ago in respect of illegal settlements at Har Homa, he will find a remarkable similarity. What has changed is the end of any hope for the Oslo peace process, built out of existence by illegal settlements, and the dominance of factions in both communities of those least committed to justice, security, and reconciliation between the Israeli and Palestinian peoples. When will the United Kingdom take real accountability for those breaching international and humanitarian law, including those indiscriminately mortaring the innocent, the disproportionate response of by the occupiers to violence by the occupied, and decades of the violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention that has made a practical mockery of British policy commitment to a two-state solution?
Mr. Speaker, as I've said, the UK's position on settlements is long-standing, and it is clear and has been communicated here and elsewhere. There is no justification. There is no justification for the violence that we're seeing coming out of Gaza and the targeting of civilians. As I said, Israel absolutely has the right to defend itself. We call upon them to act with caution and care in discharging that defence, but ultimately what we are seeking to do is bring about a speedy conclusion to the current violence that we are seeing, and then we will continue to work. And I appreciate you said that this has been a long-standing, it has been a long-standing aim of this and other governments to bring about a peaceful two-state solution so that we have a sustainable peaceful resolution to this region.
Jessica Morton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the many constituents of Newport East who've been in touch with me over the last couple of days, expressing their horror at events and calling for an end to the violence, can I too join others here calling on asking the Minister to use the considerable diplomacy of the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office to try and bring an end to this humanitarian crisis. The murder and maiming of children and civilians cannot be the solution to the ongoing tragedy of this conflict.
I can assure the Honourable Lady that we will use our considerable diplomatic might to work both with the government in Israel and in the occupied Palestinian territories through the Palestinian Authority, and with regional partners and through multilateral forum to bring about a speedy resolution to this terrible conflict, which does no good for anyone.
John Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I draw the House's attention to my register of interests. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, said, "Our commitment to Israeli security is unwavering. Of the 1,000 rockets that have been fired towards Israel, many of them have fallen short and caused damage and death in Gaza. So will the Minister confirm that we are doing everything possible to support our close ally against what amount to nothing more than terrorist groups who are out to seek Israel's destruction?"
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes a good point that the rocket attacks by Hamas from Gaza do harm not only indirectly but directly to the Palestinian people. We call upon them to cease immediately. As I've said, Israel does have the right to defend itself, and in doing so, we urge them to act with caution and to do everything within their power to minimise civilian casualties.
Let's go to Deirdre Brooke. Deirdre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The COVID-19 pandemic has hit Palestinian communities disproportionately hard, but despite Israel having the world's highest COVID-19 vaccination rate, it remains the case that under 150,000 Palestinians had been vaccinated in the occupied West Bank and Gaza. What are FCDO ministers and the representatives there doing to rectify that injustice?
Mr. Speaker, as I said, our main priority at the moment is the cessation of the violence that we have all seen. The Honourable Lady will know that the UK has been one of the most generous donors to the COVAX vaccination programme, which has helped communities across the globe have a route out of this pandemic through the vaccination process. We're incredibly proud of the £548 million that we have contributed to that, as well as our technical expertise, and that will be to the benefit of the Palestinian people and others around the world.
Let's go to Raman Chisti. Raman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like all members of Parliament, I condemn all acts of violence and the loss of innocent lives. The focus of my question to the Minister is with regards to freedom of religion or belief for all. Does the Minister agree with me that the force used against the worshippers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the 27th of Ramadan, the night of Laylatul Qadr, one of the most important nights in the Islamic calendar, was completely and utterly unacceptable? And in light of the United Kingdom's commitment to human rights and freedom of religion or of belief for all, I know the Minister has raised these matters with the Israeli authorities, but can you assure the House that you will continue to raise these with the Israeli authorities to ensure that all individuals can practice their faith freely and openly in the holy city of Jerusalem? And with that, can the Minister ensure that freedom of religion or belief and human rights is put on the G7 presidency agenda later this year?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and I pay tribute to the work that he's done with the freedom of religion or belief. He is right that violence against worshippers of whatever faith is unacceptable. As I've said, it is important that, that policing is particularly sensitive around the holy sites of the religions in Jerusalem, and particularly so during religious festivals like the holy month of Ramadan. We have made that position clear with the Israeli authorities, and we will continue to make that argument in our bilateral conversations with them.
Mr. Speaker, after years of persecution and oppression, indiscriminate attacks, a brutal siege of Gaza, the expansion of illegal settlements and demolition of Palestinian homes, unfair trials, arbitrary detention and restrictions on the freedom of movement, and now with the attack on worshippers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, tensions in the region are now the highest they have ever been. And I join others in condemning the escalation in violence and the loss of life. Mr. Speaker, yet the silence of the international community is deafening, even as the Palestinians scream out for help. So I have to ask the Minister, how many times will we come back to this House to debate the persecution of the Palestinians, and when will the international community finally wake up?
Mr. Speaker, I don't recognise at all the scenario that the honourable gentleman paints. This is an issue that I've spoken about from this dispatch box. The Prime Minister has made a statement on this issue. The Foreign Secretary has made a statement on this issue. We are speaking with the United Nations Security Council. United Nations regularly make statements on this issue. This is a terrible situation, no doubt. We are working to bring it to a conclusion, and we will continue to work to bring about a peaceful two-state solution so the Israelis and the Palestinians can live and work side by side in peace, which should be, I am sure, the goal of everyone in this House and in the wider international community.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's clear from voices across this House and internationally that everyone is incredibly disappointed to see that the violence has broken out in the region once again after the Palestinian Authority recently resumed cooperation with Israel. And does my right honourable friend agree that continuing down the path of normalisation, rather than that of violence and escalation, as we've seen recently, is the only way to secure long-term peace for the region? And will the UK government continue to support that end?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes a very important point. The UK government, at both ministerial and official level, encourages greater cooperation between the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government. I have spoken with representatives of both yesterday. I'm sure I will have further such conversations in the future. We will always support the closer working between the Palestinian Authority and the government of Israel as part of our or part of their route towards a sustainable two-state solution.
Let's go to Andy Slaughter. Andy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the Foreign Secretary will take action on ethnic cleansing in Xinjiang, why not in Sheikh Jarrah? If the UK government will impose sanctions for the occupation of the Crimea, why does it allow trade with the illegal settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories? The Minister rightly condemns the killing of children in Gaza and Israel. Does he recognise that these war crimes spring from an unlawful occupation, and will he now give his full support to the investigation of the International Criminal Court?
Mr. Speaker, I don't think it's at all helpful to try and imply that there is a commonality between the examples that he gave and the situation that we see in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. He will know that where we have criticism of the Israeli government, we have a strong enough relationship that we are able to air those criticisms, whether it be from the dispatch box here or in terms of our bilateral conversations. We will continue to work towards a sustainable, peaceful two-state solution. That remains the UK government's goal, and that will be our focus once we have helped bring this current conflict to a conclusion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last few days, I've been contacted by hundreds of constituents concerned by the proposed evictions in Sheikh Jarrah, the activities outside the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the events we've seen in the last 36 hours. Could the Minister reassure them and me and the whole House that the government will use the full power of its diplomatic network to de-escalate the immediate issue and then bring both sides back to peace talks, because that's the only way that we can prevent events like this happening again?
Mr. Speaker, the Al-Aqsa Mosque is one of the most holy sites in Islam, and Jerusalem has the privilege of being the home of a number of the holiest sites in the Abrahamic religions. Therefore, the policing of Jerusalem needs at all times to be sensitive, as I say, particularly so during the holy month of Ramadan. I can assure him and others that the UK government will work tirelessly to bring about a conclusion to this, so that we no longer have to see the distressing images that we have seen in Jerusalem, in other parts of Israel, and that we no longer have to hear about fatalities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As others have said, I condemn the violence wherever it comes from and feel very strongly that those responsible for that violence should be held to account. The Minister has spoke about bringing an end to the hostilities. There have been 4 wars in Gaza since 2000, and no one has been held to account from any side. So bringing an end to the current hostilities is not enough. The underlying problem of nobody being held to account, the demolition orders in Sheikh Jarrah, are only the tip of the iceberg. The status quo is not really the status quo. There is a third of Palestinian homes probably under threat, according to the UN, of demolition orders in the Jerusalem area. These issues need addressing before we could move to a two-state solution. Does the Minister agree with me that those engaged in violence from any side should know there will be a day of reckoning and consequences for their actions? And what will the British government do, in line with the international community, to ensure this happens?
The Honourable Lady is right that we should focus on bringing about a speedy resolution to the conflict. As I have said, the rocket attacks from Gaza are unacceptable, they are unjustified, they are completely illegitimate. Israel does have a right to defend itself, and we have made clear that in doing so, they must abide by international humanitarian law and make every effort to minimise civilian casualties. Ultimately, the two-state solution
is, in our assessment, the best way of bringing about lasting peace for the people of the region, and that will continue to be a priority area for UK foreign policy in the region.
Jack Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's deeply upsetting that we are again witnessing such violence and division, especially when the Abraham Accords signed between Israel and Gulf partners last year showed that peace is achievable. So what discussions has my right honourable friend and the Foreign Secretary had with his Israeli and Gulf counterparts on how the current tensions can be de-escalated?
I thank my honourable friend for the question. As I say, the Foreign Secretary has spoken with his Israeli counterpart and will very shortly be speaking with the Palestinian Prime Minister, amongst other calls that ministers and senior officials have been making and will continue to make. We will use our significant diplomatic strength to be a passionate and powerful voice for de-escalation and peace, and I am sure that many others in the international community will join us in doing so.
Let's go to Paula Barker. Paula.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The human misery on display in East Jerusalem, in Gaza and in Israeli cities is on show for the entire international community to bear witness to as the violence escalates. I join with honourable members on both sides of the House in condemning the violence on both sides. Sometimes the most difficult conversations are required with our allies. So what is the position of the British government on forced evictions and displacement of Palestinian families in East Jerusalem? And has the position been relayed to the Israeli government? And does the Minister believe that Mr. Netanyahu's government is sincerely committed to a viable two-state solution, given the plan previously cooked up with President Biden's predecessor? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, the UK government's position on settlements and evictions is long-standing and, as I say, has been communicated a number of times, both today at the dispatch box and at previous occasions in the dispatch box. We do, of course, outline directly to the Israeli government our position on such matters, and also from the dispatch box. And we will work with the government of Israel and the Palestinian Authority and their regional friends and neighbours to work towards a sustainable two-state solution, which remains a priority UK foreign policy.
Let's go to Jane Hunt. Jane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of my constituents have contacted me about the recent reports from Jerusalem, and I share their concerns about the ongoing violence and unrest. I therefore welcome the government's strong call for calm and de-escalation. Does my right honourable friend agree that this violence is completely unacceptable and that all sides must now come together to de-escalate tensions and achieve a peaceful resolution?
Minister.
The Honourable Lady makes a very good point that ultimately peace has to be something which is delivered by both sides, and we call upon everybody to step back from the situation, not allow it to escalate further, and indeed de-escalate so we can see an end to this conflict. We will work tirelessly to achieve that, both bilaterally and through multilateral fora.
Mr. Speaker, the government's response to this and every other episode in Palestine is and are completely inadequate. The Palestinians have lived under brutalistic oppression and apartheid by Israel with the tacit consent of the West for too long. We've heard the plague on both their houses sung too many times. Of course, we must condemn all violence on both sides. So in that spirit, can the Minister tell me whether he thinks it appropriate that the UK grant arms licences that sees UK weapons used in these indiscriminate Israeli attacks on civilians, including children?
Mr. Speaker, the government takes its arms export responsibilities very seriously, and we aim to operate one of the most robust arms export licences in the world. And we consider all our export applications against a strict risk assessment framework and keep all licences under careful and continual review as a standard.
Let's go to Andrew Selous. Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And while there is never any excuse for firing rockets on civilians, wouldn't Israelis sleep more soundly at night if access to all the holy sites was maintained as agreed in 1967, free Palestinian elections were allowed in East Jerusalem, and Palestinians were not being evicted from their homes in Jerusalem.
Mr. Speaker, as I've said, the UK's position on evictions is well known. It is incredibly important that worshippers have access to these very holy sites in Jerusalem. We have been supportive of Palestinian Authority elections, and we push for them to go ahead, including in East Jerusalem.
Let's go to Janet Davey. Janet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What we're seeing in the news is absolutely horrific. Many constituents have contacted me in the last few days about the violence against worshippers during Ramadan, as well as the evictions in Sheikh Jarrah. Airstrikes on both sides must absolutely end, and I condemn this violence. As the occupying power, the Israeli government has legal obligations that it is not meeting. What is the UK government doing to ensure Israel adheres to international law?
The Honourable Lady is right that violence against peaceful worshippers of any faith is unacceptable. We condemn, as I've said, the rocket attacks from Gaza, and we will continue to be a voice for calm and region. A voice for calm and peace in this region, and we'll work with international partners, and that does include at times having difficult conversations with some of our friends in the region, but we are unafraid of doing so when necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The violence and the loss of life is tragic, and it does need to stop. But isn't it the case that right under the noses of the international community, Hamas has been allowed to build a terrorist city-state in Gaza? They've diverted humanitarian resources into stockpiling missiles behind civilian buildings. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that it's wrong to draw some kind of phony equivalence between the actions and the aggression of terrorists and the sovereign right of a legitimate democratic government to defend its citizens? I wouldn't expect the Minister at the dispatch box or anybody else in our government to do anything other than what the Israeli government is doing to defend its citizens.
Minister. My right honourable friend makes an important point that the military wing of Hamas is a proscribed terrorist organisation, and we have a policy of no contact with Hamas in its entirety. We completely condemn the rocket attacks from Gaza into Israel, and they are the actions of a terrorist organisation. As I've said, Israel has the right to defend itself, but what we have said, and I have said this at the dispatch box and directly to representatives of the Israeli government, that in doing so, they must abide by international humanitarian law, and they must do everything they can to minimise civilian casualties.
Let's go to Yasmin Qureshi. Yasmin.
Mr. Speaker, the extensive expansion of illegal settlements in East Jerusalem, forced eviction of Palestinian families from their homes in Sheikh Jarrah, brutality against worshippers in the third most holy site in Islam and during Ramadan. This isn't about a clash between two equal sides. Until we discuss the root issue, we miss the entire context, but fails to recognize that one side is an occupier and the other is occupied. Will the minister demand that the Israeli ends all the discriminatory and illegal practices that have actually provoked these current tensions? And what specifically will he do to ensure for accountability and for violations of international law, which have been going on for the last 50 years?
Mr. Speaker, as I say, the UK's position on settlements and evictions is clear. I have spoken about it from this dispatch box today and in the past, and we've also had that conversation directly with the Israeli government. However, I would make the point there is no legitimacy, there is no justification for the indiscriminate rocket attacks from Gaza into Israel.
Bob Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the Muslim community in Aylesbury are extremely distressed by recent events in East Jerusalem, describing this as a moment of deep anguish and sorrow. They want to see an immediate end to the eviction of Palestinians from their homes, as well as immediate towards a two-state solution. So does my right honourable friend agree that that is in fact the only way to deliver Palestinian self-determination, to permanently end the Arab-Israeli conflict, and preserve Israel's Jewish and democratic identity, and that therefore his department remains committed to achieving that solution based on 1967 borders with agreed land swaps?
Mr. Speaker, I think members in every part of this House and our constituents will have been deeply distressed by the images that we have seen in some of the most holy sites, as you say, not only in Islam but in Christianity and Judaism. It is in everybody's interest to de-escalate, to bring this current period of violence to a conclusion, and then, as he says, work towards what has been a long-standing UK government position of a peaceful two-state solution based on the lines with agreed land swaps through a political process.
27 withdrawn, so we're going to go to Steve Baker. Steve.
Mr. Speaker, given how hard and fast this conflict escalated, and as we approach Eid, can I ask, what will the government do specifically to encourage Israel to guarantee freedom of worship for Muslims at the Al-Aqsa Mosque?
My honourable friend makes, maybe in the future, my honourable friend makes an incredibly important point about the importance during this holy month of Ramadan for worshippers to have access to one of the most holy sites in Islam. And that's something we have communicated with the Israeli government. We will continue to work towards a de-escalation, particularly at this most sensible and religious time. That is a conversation that we have had recently, and we will continue to have both at ministerial and senior official level.
Mr. Speaker, in 2018, I stood in Malfalson in the southern district of Israel, just on the edge of the Gaza Strip, and held in my hands the remains of a Hamas-engineered rocket fired into a playground of school children, with one intention only: to murder mothers and children doing what we have the freedom in this nation to do, raise our kids in peace. The horror in the Holy Land. No right-thinking person could not be heartbroken by what they see on our television screens. But isn't it the case, Minister, that Hamas will not negotiate with Israel because they want to murder Israelis and they want to obliterate the state of Israel off the map of the world? That is their stated objective and position, that the Palestinian people need to free themselves from being used as human shields by a terrorist and political organisation that wishes to continue to rocket launch attacks into Israel. And I would urge the Minister to do everything in his power to persuade the Palestinian people to free themselves from the grip of Hamas.
Mr. Speaker, the rocket attacks by Hamas, which, as I say, whose military wing is a prescribed terrorist organisation by the UK government, is completely counterproductive to the effort for peace, does harm to the Palestinian people. We urge Hamas to cease on behalf of moves towards peace. We urge them to stop these actions because it is completely completely counterproductive to peace and completely against the interests of the Palestinian people in Gaza and elsewhere.
Imran Hamad Khan.
Mr. Speaker, I'm deeply concerned by the escalating tension between Israel and Palestine, and we all here condemn the violence against civilians on both sides, whether that be the murderous missile attacks or what I consider the misguided attempted eviction of Palestinian residents in Sheikh. Not the time to do a deal with Iran that rewards it for instigating further instability in the region, as well as violating its JCPOA nuclear commitments and its obligations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Is this not another reminder, where one needed, that we must not appease this dangerous regime?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not able to speak on the point that he's made about the relationship between Iran, or the potential relationship between Iran and Hamas at this point. We are working to de-escalate the situation, as I have said, and to bring about peace. More broadly, we are seeking to bring greater stability to the region
to dissuade Iran from its destabilising actions within the region, and that will continue to be a priority piece of work for Her Majesty's Government.
Final question, Christian Whitfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The events in Jerusalem have triggered emotive responses here in the UK, and we only need to look at the protest last night to see that. My constituents and others have seen in the past that when conflict erupts in the Middle East, the UK Jewish community is targeted by those wishing to import this complex situation onto our streets, our university campuses and online. So what does my right honourable friend say to those who seek to cause divisions between communities here in the UK, and will he join me in thanking the CST for all the work they're doing to keep the Jewish community safe?
Mr. Speaker, anti-Semitic acts and violence against the Jewish community, wherever they be, are unacceptable. I do pay tribute to the CST and others that seek to keep communities safe. In the UK, we enjoy, for the most part, very good community relations. We should be very proud of that and seek to reinforce that. And I think one of the things that is important for us to do is to demonstrate that we are good friends of Israel, good friends of the Palestinian people, seeking a peaceful two-state solution which can see people of all faiths enjoy the peace and security that they deserve.
Order. I'm now suspending the House for 3 minutes to enable the necessary arrangements for the next business to take place. Okay. Order. I now call the Prime Minister to make a statement. Prime Minister Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. With your permission, I will update the House on our response to COVID. The patience and hard work of the British people have combined with the success of the vaccination programme to reduce deaths and hospitalisations to their lowest level since last July. And from Monday, England will ease lockdown restrictions in line with step 3 of our roadmap. This will amount to the single biggest step of our journey back to normality. But after everything we've endured, we must be vigilant because the threat of this virus remains real and new variants pose a potentially lethal danger, including the one first identified in India, which is of increasing concern here in the UK. So caution has to be our watchword. Our country, like every country, has found itself in the teeth of the gravest pandemic for a century, imposing heartbreaking sorrow on families across the world, with more than 127,000 lives lost in the United Kingdom alone. And our grief would have been still greater without the daily heroism of the men and women of our National Health Service, the protection of our vaccines, already in the arms of over 2/3 of adults across the UK, and the dedication of everyone who has followed the rules and sacrificed so much that we cherish. Amid such tragedy, the state has an obligation to examine its actions as rigorously and as candidly as possible and to learn every lesson for the future, which is why I have always said that when the time is right, there should be a full and independent inquiry. So, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm today that the government will establish an independent public inquiry on a statutory basis with full powers under the Inquiries Act of 2005, including the ability to compel the production of all relevant materials and take oral evidence in public under oath. In establishing the inquiry, we will work closely with the devolved administrations as we have done throughout our pandemic response. And my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, has this morning spoken to the First Ministers of Scotland and Wales and the First and Deputy First Ministers of Northern Ireland to begin those conversations. Every part of our United Kingdom has suffered the ravages of this virus, and every part of the state has pulled together to do battle against it. And if we are to recover as one Team UK, as we must, then we should also learn lessons together in the same spirit. So we will consult the devolved administrations before finalising the scope and detailed arrangements so that this inquiry can consider all key aspects of the UK response. Mr. Speaker, this process will place the state's actions under the microscope, and we should be mindful of the scale of that undertaking and the resources required to do it properly. The exercise of identifying and disclosing all relevant information, the months of preparation and retrospective analysis, and the time that people will have to spend testifying in public, in some cases for days, will place a significant burden on our NHS, on the whole of government, on our scientific advisors, and on many others. We must not inadvertently divert or distract the very people on whom we all depend in the heat of our struggle against this disease. And the end of the lockdown is not the end of the pandemic. The World Health Organization has said that the pandemic has now reached its global peak and will last throughout this year. Our own scientific advisors judge that although more positive data is coming in and the outlook is improving, there could still be another resurgence in hospitalizations and deaths. We also face the persistent threat of new variants, and should these prove highly transmissible and elude the protection of our vaccines, they would have the potential to cause even greater suffering than we endured in January. And there is, in any case, a high likelihood of a surge this winter when the weather assists the transmission of all respiratory diseases and when the pressure on our NHS is most acute. So I expect that the right moment for the inquiry to begin is at the end of this period in the spring of next year, spring 2022. And Mr. Speaker, I know that there will be some in this chamber and many bereaved families who will be anxious for this inquiry to begin sooner. So let me reassure the House that we are fully committed to learning the lessons at every stage of this crisis. And we've already subjected our response to independent scrutiny, including 17 reports by the Independent National Audit Office and 50 parliamentary inquiries already. And we will continue to do so. We will continue to learn lessons as you have done throughout the pandemic. But no public inquiry could take place fast enough to assist in the very difficult judgments which will remain necessary throughout the rest of the year and the remainder of the pandemic. And we must not weigh down the efforts of those engaged in protecting us every day and thereby risk endangering further lives. Instead, this inquiry must be able to look at the events of the last year in the cold light of day and identify the key issues that will make a difference for the future. Free to scrutinise every document, to hear from all the key players, and analyse and learn from the breadth of our response. And that's the right way, I think, to get the answers that the people of this country deserve, and to ensure that our United Kingdom is better prepared for any future pandemic. Mr. Speaker, entirely separately from the inquiry, there is a solemn duty on our whole United Kingdom to come together and cherish the memories of those who have been lost. Like many across this chamber, I was deeply moved when I visited the COVID memorial wall opposite Parliament. And I wholeheartedly support the plan for a memorial in St Paul's Cathedral, which will provide a fitting place of reflection in the heart of our capital. I also know that communities across the whole country will want to find ways of commemorating what we have all been through. So the government will support their efforts by establishing a UK Commission on COVID commemoration. This national endeavour above party politics will remember the loved ones we have lost, honour the heroism of those who have saved lives, and the courage of frontline workers who have kept our country going, celebrate the genius of those who created the vaccines, and commemorate the small acts of kindness and the daily sacrifice of millions who stayed at home, buying time for our scientists to come to our rescue. We will set out the Commission membership and terms of reference in due course. And in telling the whole story of this era in our history, we will work again across our United Kingdom together with the devolved administrations to preserve the spirit which has sustained us in the gravest crisis since the Second World War, resolving to go forwards together, Mr. Speaker, and to build back better, and I commend this statement to the House.
I now call the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement, and can I clearly welcome the independent inquiry into the pandemic and the establishing of a UK Commission on COVID commemoration. Both are necessary, both will play an important part in learning the lessons and commemorating those we have lost. Mr. Speaker, let me speak first for the families grieving the loss of a loved one. I too attended the COVID memorial wall that the Prime Minister spoke of opposite Parliament. It is moving. Everybody who's been there knows it's moving. Hearts on the wall, thousands of hearts, stretching from one bridge to the next and rightly facing this place. But I've also taken time to meet the grieving and bereaved families on a number of occasions and talk to them and with them about their experience. Mr. Speaker, those meetings have been amongst the most difficult I've ever had in my life. And the same goes for the staff that came with me and the other members of my team that were in those meetings. Because what those families described was not just the loved one they have lost, the dad, the mum, the sister, the brother, and tell me something about the individuals. It was not just the fact that they had passed away. The hardest bit was the details. They told me about not being able to say goodbye in the way they wanted, whether that was a hospital or elsewhere. and not being able to have a funeral in the way that they wanted. It's very hard to hear some of those stories, and lots of those families have searing questions about what happened, the decisions, what went wrong, why what happened to their families. So it is good that the government is consulting the devolved authorities, of course it is. But the government must also consult the families, because this inquiry will only work if it has the support and confidence of the families. And I urge the Prime Minister and the government to consult the families at the earliest possible moment. The government should also consult those on the front line who have done so much, whether in the NHS, social care, or other front lines that we've seen, because they too deserve answers to the very many questions that they have, and they have done so much in this pandemic. Mr. Speaker, the next question is timing. The principle is that the inquiry should be as soon as possible. As soon as possible. Now, I understand an inquiry, a statutory inquiry, will take time to set up. Of course it will. But why can it not be later this year? Why can it not start earlier? And I want to press the Prime Minister just on one particular point. The Prime Minister says the inquiry will start in spring 2022. Is that, Prime Minister, the opening of the inquiry and the beginning of taking of evidence, spring 2022, or is that starting work in setting up the inquiry? They're two very different things. Because if it's the latter, the inquiry won't then be for many months afterwards. So if it is to open, formally open, start taking evidence in the spring of 22, I'd be really grateful if the Prime Minister could make that clear. Then there's the question of the terms of reference. Obviously, that will take time. There'll have to be consultation with the devolved administrations, again with the families and those on the front line, but crucially with this Parliament. This House needs to be involved in the question of what the terms of reference should be. There will be different views across the House, and they need to be heard, because this has to have the confidence of all in this chamber. And all relevant questions must be asked and answered. And that must, of course, include the decisions made in the last 14 or 15 months, all of the decisions made. But there are wider questions of preparedness and resilience, particularly of our public services, that need to be asked. And, Mr. Speaker, there are reasons why the pandemic hit those in overcrowded houses and insecure work hardest. They need to be addressed as well, and no inquiry that doesn't address those questions will give the answers that many deserve. Finally, Mr. Speaker, there's the question of who chairs the inquiry. Again, this is too early, but I would say this, that the wider the engagement on that question, the wider the likely support for the inquiry. What we need is an independent inquiry which has the full support of everybody, so that its conclusions bear real authority. That will be achieved with the widest embracing of the terms of reference and the chair of the inquiry. But, Mr. Speaker, let me be clear, I do welcome this inquiry, and we will play whatever part we can to make sure that this works well and gets the answers to the questions. And again, we do support the Commemoration Commission, and will work on a cross-party basis to ensure that that is fully the sort of commemoration that the families and others who've lost through this pandemic feel is appropriate. And that should, of course, be on a cross-party basis. It is above politics, and rightly so. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the right honourable gentleman for his support for both the measures announced today, for the Commemoration Commission, and also for the inquiry. And he asks some entirely justifiable questions about engagement with the bereaved, with those who've been on the front line, about the areas in which the inquiry will want to be focusing, all the background to the growth of the pandemic. And I have no doubt that when it is set up, the inquiry will certainly be looking at all of those, and will be making sure to have the widest possible consultation and engagement. I just think the House should understand that I feel personally very, very strongly that this country has been through a trauma like no other. It is absolutely vital for the sake of the bereaved, for the sake of the whole country, that we should understand exactly what happened. We should learn the lessons. Obviously, we've been learning lessons throughout, but we need to have a very clear understanding of what took place over the last 14 months. I think we owe it to the country to have as much transparency as we possibly can. And I think we owe it to the country to produce answers within a reasonable timescale, Mr. Speaker. And I'm sure that the House will want to see that as well, though clearly that will be a matter for the chair of the inquiry in the terms of reference when they are set up. But it is my strong, strong view that the country wants to see a proper, full, and above all, an independent inquiry into the pandemic of the last year. I must repeat my point to him that I do think that the timing that we've set out is the right timing. I think that it would be wrong to consecrate huge amounts of official time, of public health workers' time to an inquiry when they may very well be still in the middle of the pandemic. But clearly, just to clarify the point that the right honourable gentleman raises, the steps taken to set out the terms of reference, to establish the chair of the inquiry, all that will happen before the spring of next year. So we'll be getting it underway, we'll be taking some key decisions, but I think that the House will agree that it would not be right to devote the time of people who are looking after us, who are saving lives, to an inquiry before we can be much more certain than we are now that the pandemic is behind us. And I hope that carries the approval of the House.
Let's go to Caroline Noakes. Caroline.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Primary care networks have done an incredible job rolling out the vaccine, but GPs and practice nurses need to return to their surgeries and their patients. And as my right honourable friend has said, we have to anticipate a difficult autumn and winter. What reassurance can he give that there will be capacity in the system for second jabs, potentially for booster jabs in the autumn, and the annual rollout of the flu jab?
My honourable friend raises a very important point, particularly about the flu jab, because as she will know, there wasn't much of a flu pandemic over the last winter period. We're worried about people's levels of resistance to flu, but we have the capacity, and we will also have the capacity for the booster jabs as well.
Come to SNP spokesperson Kirsten.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And let me begin by thanking the Prime Minister for an advance copy of his statement. I was interested to hear the Prime Minister committing to an inquiry. He'll be aware the First Minister already committed to this, and of course the devolved administrations have tailored their decisions to their needs. I do think all of us can feel a sense of optimism, the feeling that after such a difficult year things are edging towards some normality. And the simplest of things, hugging a loved one, have never felt so important after a year of restrictions, and have never, as he said, seen people suffer so much. The vaccines have generated the hope people are feeling now, and that hope is within touching distance. But, Mr. Speaker, just as the hope is fragile, so is the economic recovery. The Prime Minister has just spoken of lessons and answers and timing. This morning's ONS figures demonstrate the depth of the plummet that's been experienced by the economy, and equally show the scale of the recovery needed. That's why the glaring omission of an employment bill from yesterday's Queen's speech was so shocking, a clear signal of a UK government with no recovery plan. So today, let me ask the Prime Minister 3 specific questions on concrete measures that would help kickstart the economy and help those still in need. Firstly, will his government reverse its rigid plan to suddenly end the furlough scheme in September, which will result in a damaging cliff edge for millions of workers? Secondly, there's another damaging cliff edge due in September with the planned Tory cut to the lifeline of £20 universal credit uplift. Is he really still planning to rip that lifeline away from the most vulnerable when they most need it? And finally, as people re-enter the workplace, will the Prime Minister commit to supporting legislation led by my colleague, the member for Paisley and Renfrewshire North, that would finally ban the disgraceful practice of fire and rehire of workers?
Mr. Speaker, the entire programme of this government is dedicated to ensuring that we go from jabs to jobs, as I said yesterday in the Chamber. And she talked about kick-starting an employment recovery. Actually, we have, as she knows, for young people, the £2 billion Kickstart programme to get 18 to 24-year-olds into work, the Restart programme for those who are long-term unemployed. Our campaign, our mission, Mr. Speaker, is to use the resources of the state, as we have done throughout the pandemic, to get people into work. We had to, because of the unusual circumstances, the extraordinary circumstances that we faced, Mr. Speaker, we had to use the resources of the state to keep people out of work. We're now going through a massive programme of investment in infrastructure across the whole of the United Kingdom to get people into work, and I hope that she will support that.
Andrew Mitchell. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The whole House will welcome the tone and the content of what the Prime Minister has said today, and in particular his proper commitment to the transparency of the inquiry, learning everything we can from the past. If I may just make this point to him, there are 3,500 people across my constituency who are involved in the hospitality sector, and many businesses have invested their own money in making COVID adaptations to ensure the safety of their customers when they return. Given the very sensible roadmap that he has outlined, will he emphasise the increasing role of personal judgment and common sense rather than government fiat, as greater normality returns, and with it, of course, are hugely valued and much cherished civil liberties?
I thank him very much, and as he knows, the hospitality sector in Sutton Coldfield, which I know from my own to be wonderful, will, like the rest of the hospitality sector across the country, be able to open up in full on Monday, including indoors. And as we go forward, we hope, and I can't see any evidence, Mr. Speaker, to contradict this, we hope that we'll be able to open up fully from June the 21st, though people will still clearly need to exercise caution and common sense in the way they go about their lives, because the virus, I'm afraid, is still going to be present in our lives for a long time to come.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The public inquiry is very welcome and desperately needed so that the public can understand why the UK has suffered one of the highest death tolls in the world. So it is critically important that this inquiry is properly independent and has the confidence of the public, including the bereaved families of the over 127,000 people who so tragically lost their lives. Consulting with those families once the inquiry is started is too late. So will the Prime Minister today commit to urgently meeting with the COVID-19 bereaved families for justice to consult with them both on the chair and the terms of reference for the inquiry?
Mr. Speaker, I can certainly reassure the Honourable Lady that the inquiry will be fully independent, and that the bereaved and other groups will be consulted on the way it's set up, and I meet representatives of the bereaved and indeed bereaved families regularly, and will continue to do so.
Jeremy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the announcement on the public inquiry and the timings. The Prime Minister will know that the Science and Technology and Health and Social Care Select Committees are doing their own inquiry, which is hoping to report in July. So the government will have an early chance to learn immediate lessons, but it would be crazy to ask ministers and officials to spend time with lawyers and going through emails and texts and WhatsApps when we want their entire focus to be on the pandemic. As we seek to support the NHS going forward, the additional 50,000 nurses pledges are very welcome. But does the Prime Minister know we also have shortages in nearly every single specialty for doctors? And is this not now the moment to overhaul our long-term workforce planning for the NHS so that we can give the public confidence that we really are training enough doctors for the future?
Yes, absolutely, Mr. Speaker, and a distinguished former Health Secretary will, I'm sure, know that there are now 50,000 more people working in the NHS this year than there were at the same time last year, including, I think, about 11,000 more nurses already and 6,700 more doctors. But we're going to get even more, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement, in particular for those who have lost family members. I'm very conscious of my wife losing her mum, and we all grieve for her especially. So the involvement of the Northern Ireland Assembly in this to have the inquiry and look back on that is very, very important, and I welcome that, Prime Minister. Could the Prime Minister outline what discussion has taken place between the devolved regions to ensure a parity of travel restrictions and to ensure that every area of the UK can safely be accessed? And would the Prime Minister confirm that help will be made available to make travel affordable and encourage people to go to Northern Ireland over the summer to make the most of the Great British Summer Staycation throughout every area of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland?
I thank him for his excellent question, and we of course consult regularly with all the DAs about making sure that travel can continue to flow freely through our United Kingdom. And he makes a superb point about the attractions of Northern Ireland as a holiday destination. I hope people take him up on his point.
Let's go to Suzanne Webb. Suzanne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, may I start with thanking you for coming to visit the good residents of Stourbridge last week. Cars stopped, horns were honked, and people came out in their droves to say thank you for the success of the vaccine rollout. Last week, voters made it clear right here in Stourbridge that they want the focus to be on their priorities, not political gains, demonstrated by the fact that I now have Conservative councillors and traditional Labour bastions of Quarrybank, Lye and Cradley, more voters coming out than ever before to say this. Does the Prime Minister share my hope that the members opposite will now act constructively with this government so it can deliver on their priorities as we build back better?
Minister.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. I much enjoyed my trip to Stourbridge, and she's entirely right in what she says. And to get back to the point I was making, the honourable lady from the Scottish National Party, I think that the agenda that we have is right for the country. This is the right time to build back better with the colossal programme that we have, the investments that we're making. But we've also got to learn the lessons from the pandemic, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we're setting up the inquiry in the way that we are.
Let's go to Andrew Gwynn. Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's statement and particularly his commitment to an inquiry at the appropriate time. On that, terminology really does count. So can the Prime Minister confirm that it's not just going to be independent and judge-led, but it will be a statutory public inquiry under the Public Inquiries Act with the powers to compel witnesses under oath? And most importantly of all, will bereaved families have a role in setting the terms of the inquiry and be given the full opportunity to give evidence at the inquiry?
I wouldn't like to accuse the honourable gentleman I admire greatly of missing my opening statement, but of course it will be a full public independent inquiry under the terms of the 2005 Act, and of course it's right that the bereaved, along with many other groups, should be consulted about the terms of reference.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's statement, especially that the inquiry will be independent. In fear of already judging the inquiry, I am anxious about institutions such as Public Health England and how they responded early on to key workers. And I hope the inquiry will also congratulate the fantastic doctors, nurses and volunteers who helped roll out over 1.5 million vaccines in Sussex. And I'm incredibly grateful for all the staff in Uckfield, Crowborough and Howsham. But the Prime Minister can do two things immediately for my care homes in my constituency. One is, at the moment, if you want to reside in a care home, you have to spend 14 days isolated in your room. Can the Prime Minister look again at that isolation period, because it is so impactful on the physical and mental health of residents? And the second is this: the care homes have taken such a big hit. Can we consider a short financial package to support them so they can support our loved ones throughout this period? Thank you.
My honourable friend is totally right to raise the work of care homes. We've put repeated investments into, and I think another £1 billion went into supporting care homes throughout the pandemic. But she's also right to raise the very painful questions of visiting and the ability of care home residents to leave their care home safely. And Mr. Speaker, there we have to balance the risks to them as well. We've tried to, as you know, to increase the number of visitors they can have, and we hope very soon that greater freedoms will be possible.
Cat Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister reassure the House that the terms and reference of this inquiry will include those suffering from long COVID, including diagnosis and treatment and support for those that will be no doubt suffering for a foreseeable future?
She makes an excellent point, and I'm sure the chairman of the inquiry will want to consider that as we set up the inquiry in due course. But I certainly don't exclude that long COVID could be something that the inquiry will want to look at.
Dr. Kieran Mullen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has talked powerfully about the importance of economic recovery now. And for those of us that supported the lockdown, I think it's incumbent on us to get behind that in however we can. If we get it wrong, we'll pay the cost of the pandemic twice over. Tomorrow, a report will be released describing the opportunities of geothermal investment for our economy, potentially creating over 1,000 new jobs and £100 million of investment by 2025. New jobs, new technologies, that's the key to getting our economic recovery on track. Will the Prime Minister give the report his personal attention and agree to meet with me and other MPs that are getting behind this important new industry?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very excited and interested by his geothermal plans, and they sound good to me, and we are certainly investing in that kind of technology. You know, 22 billion into just pure R&D. We're putting in record sums for this country, and I'm sure that geothermal could be part of the mix of our green industrial revolution, Mr. Speaker.
Alan Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree that the inquiry is going to have to look at the original decision-making process, which failed to control borders, delayed the lockdown while talking about herd immunity, look at the appointment process for Dido Harding to head up the track and trace system, and also look at the billions of pounds worth of PPE contracts awarded to Tory chums and friends? And will they confirm that the inquiry will have the powers to call all electronic communications between government ministers and the Tory chums that got contracts?
Speaker, without in any way accepting the premises of his questions, I can certainly confirm that it will be a full public inquiry under the 2005 Act with full powers to compel evidence.
Jonathan Gillis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate the Prime Minister on his statement and the announcement that my right honourable friend announced that step 3 of our roadmap to recovery will go ahead as scheduled on the 17th of May. Like many across Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Talk, I enjoyed a pint from the Mill Race in Milton and another at the Bull's Head in Burslem, as pubs were able to open outdoors under step 2 of our roadmap. However, not every publican has been able to open their doors yet, and both they and the excellent local brewers, such as Titanic Brewery in Burslem, have faced a very hard time throughout this pandemic. So will my right honourable friend create a new draft beer duty rate to provide targeted support for breweries and pubs throughout the UK, which is only possible since leaving the European Union, recognising the importance pubs play in our local communities?
I thank him for pointing out another of the advantages of leaving the European Union. But although we've consulted publicans and brewers on the potential for a differential duty rate on draft beer, we're awaiting the responses from the Treasury, and the Treasury will reply in due course.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. An 11-year-old girl called Mary caught COVID in December 2020. Her family used to describe her as bouncing off the walls and full of energy. She loved sport and was excited about starting secondary school in September. Now she is fatigued, lethargic. She walks with a stick and she can only attend school part-time. The doctors are baffled because she had no underlying health conditions and she seems unable to recover. Please can the Prime Minister help me find the family the expert advice and support that Mary needs and provide urgent resources for children suffering with long COVID in Hollands riding?
I thank her for raising the case of Mary, and I'm very sorry to hear about her suffering. If she would be kind enough to write to me about her, I will see what I can do to make sure that we get the right answers from government and see what we can do to get her the medical help she needs.
Let's go to Elliot Colburn. Elliot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I warmly welcome the Prime Minister's statement today. I know from speaking to Carshalton and Wallington residents that they are particularly concerned as we emerge from the pandemic about backlogs in elective surgery, cancer treatments, and looking after the mental health of those who have struggled in lockdown. So can my right honourable friend assure me that these will be front and centre of our plans for the NHS as we emerge from the pandemic?
He is quite right to raise that issue, and I can tell him that we've already invested considerably in mental health and mental health support, mental health youth ambassador, but we will continue to do more. And I think I said in the press conference on Monday, this is Mental Health Awareness Week, and people who have been struggling during the pandemic really should not hesitate to seek help.
Let's go to Steve McCabe. Steve.
Thank you. When does the Prime Minister expect pregnant women and others advised to seek an alternative to the AstraZeneca jab to be able to book one without being passed from pillar to post?
Well, Mr. Speaker, to the best of my knowledge, everybody is getting the jabs when they're asked to come forward. If he has a particular cases where people are worried about the time when they're going to get a jab, whether it's AstraZeneca or Pfizer or Moderna or another one, I'd be very grateful if he would send me the details, and we'll see what we can do to sort it out.
Let's wander up to Mark Logan. Mark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And a high prevalence of the Indian variants, amongst the highest infection rates in the UK at 150 plus per 100,000. Can the Prime Minister join me in pushing for most of Bolton to be vaccinated ASAP?
He's making a very good point about the rates of infection amongst the B161.7.2 variant, as I think we should probably call it. At the moment, the cases are looking as though they're about 860 or so, but there may be more. It may be more transmissible, Mr. Speaker. It may be considerably more transmissible. We're looking at all the potential solutions for the surges we're seeing in Bolton and elsewhere, including the one he describes, though that's not top of the list at the moment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister says in a statement that the public inquiry, which I certainly welcome, will put the state's actions under the microscope. Now, the Prime Minister is, of course, First Lord of the Treasury, and he has said many times before that this government has put its arms around people financially. Can you tell us why, therefore, people on legacy benefits did not get the extension of the £20 uplift that people in universal credit got?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this country has done everything it can to support people throughout the pandemic, and with increasing universal credit, with a furlough scheme, with loans and credits and grants that I think most people around the world would consider amongst the most, if not the single most generous regime that any country put in place. And I think it was the right thing to do, and we will continue to support people for as long as the pandemic endures.
Let's go to Sir Robert Neal. Sir Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Reference has already been made to the unfortunate impact that the lockdown had upon treatment for other medical conditions. As the Prime Minister has seen, the Stroke Association report, Stroke Recoveries at Risk, that demonstrates starkly how unhappily every aspect of stroke aftercare and rehabilitation has been impacted by the lockdown. As we emerge and build back, will he undertake that not only will we make it a top priority to ensure that stroke and related therapies are restored to pre-pandemic levels as a matter of urgency, but also that we invest to make sure that we are able consistently meet clinical guidelines for the amounts of therapy given, which we have been struggling to do so up until now in any event.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right to stress the backlog that we now face in the NHS, the stroke care, stroke services that need to be addressed. The weight of work is enormous, but we will make sure that we fund it and we get it done. And it's absolutely vital for the people who do have conditions, who do need treatment, stroke patients and others, do come forward now to get the treatment they need.
Let's go to Clive Effort. Clive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's own figures suggest that since March, we have built up a stockpile of about 12 million vaccines. During this period of time, we in London were told that supplies were down and that the vaccine rate would not be as fast as it had been. So can the Prime Minister explain this and say what he can do to ensure that we get these vaccines into people's arms and that this stockpile doesn't continue to grow?
No, Mr. Speaker, that's a misunderstanding, I believe, and we've been vaccinating, continue to vaccinate at a steady and a rate and as fast as we possibly can, and we're secure in our supply, but obviously we don't want to get to the stage, Mr. Speaker, where we run out, and we're confident that we'll be able to offer everybody in this country a vaccination before the end of July. Every adult in this country.
To Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate and thank my right honourable friend for the success of the vaccination programme and the roadmap, which has provided certainty and stability, especially to those planning for the easing of restrictions. My constituents often ask me, what will the new normal be like beyond the 21st of June? And of course, much depends on the outcome of the reviews, those into social distancing and others, which will have far-ranging impact on what our society will be like for months to come. While we eagerly await to hear their conclusions, can my right honourable friend assure me that we'll have a chance to debate the recommendations before they are implemented?
Yes, indeed I can, Mr. Speaker.
If this inquiry is to achieve everything that we would want of it, then it must be the preeminent vehicle by which the voice of those who have lost loved ones in this pandemic will be heard. I'm pretty certain that ministers, officials, health professionals, business interests and others will all have good quality legal representation in that, many of them paid out of the public purse. Can the Prime Minister give me some commitment today that bereaved families will also get the necessary support to ensure that they have the same level of quality of representation so that their voices will be properly heard?
Yes, and I believe that that is not only vital for the inquiry, because I think that the inquiry must learn from the direct experiences of the bereaved who have suffered so much, and I think that they will provide invaluable evidence for the inquiry. But it's also plainly a matter of justice and fairness, and I fully accept the point he makes.
Jim Wakefield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to start by thanking everyone across Radcliffe, Prestwich and Whitefield for the work they've been doing in regards to the vaccine rollout, because that is allowing us to go through the roadmap and reopen the economy. For those who are still asking a few questions, and I think in regards in particular to those going through marriage, obviously this should be the best day of their lives. However, they're still worried about what the actual guidance will be saying from when they can get married from next week. So will my very honourable friend commit to publishing that so we know what social guidance will look like moving forward so they can fully enjoy that best day of their lives?
Right, yes, I can. I mean, so from Monday, it's the rule of 30. 30 applies to marriages, and we will set out all the details about the marriage world post June the 21st, as I said, before the end of this month.
Let's go to Dan Jarvis. Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Prime Minister will want to warmly welcome the newly elected Metro Mayors, Nick Johnson, Dan Norris, and of course, Tracy Brabin. As the Prime Minister well knows, serving as a mayor is an immense privilege, but as COVID has proved, it is not without its frustrations. So, can I urge the Prime Minister to use this moment to reset the relationship with the English mayors and work more collaboratively and closely with us as we emerge from the pandemic?
Yes, I certainly can, Mr. Speaker, though my observation, I believe that the the mayors and the metropolitan, the mayoral authorities should also have their say, Mr. Speaker. In my experience, there are two types of mayor. I think the mayoral project is a great one, but it tends to produce mayors who champion their area, who get on and take responsibility for their area, or people who whinge and blame central government for things. And I much prefer type A to type B, Mr. Speaker.
Matt Vickers.
Mr. Speaker, whilst across the country people have retreated to the safety of their own homes, our retail workers have had to roll up their sleeves and get on with it, ensuring we had what we needed and that our shopping spaces were safe. Unfortunately, no, in fact, disgustingly and shockingly, the number of assaults on our retail workers is through the roof. Will the Prime Minister join me in thanking our retail workers for their exceptional service to our communities and ensure that we're doing everything we can to protect them and tackle those that would do them harm?
I totally share my honourable friend's disgust at attacks on retail workers, anybody doing their job, and it is very, very important that we work with the retail sector to drive down this type of crime. We show zero tolerance for it, and also, of course, that we, when in the case of serious violence and assault, that we have appropriate penalties, Mr. Speaker.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my father-in-law died at the beginning of the pandemic. Our children not able to go to their grandfather's funeral. Our grief remains raw. So let me welcome the commitment to those families and the memorial. But can I draw the Prime Minister's attention to the scope of the inquiry? Because we do know, don't we, that the fracturing of social care, running the NHS at 90% capacity, the lessons warned in the flu pandemic strategy in 2014, and the lessons from Operation Cygnus all forewarned much of what has happened. And for those of us who've worked in emergency planning, we were shocked at the initial responses. So can the Prime Minister assure us that the scope of the inquiry will go beyond the 14 months I think he has alluded to in one of his previous statements?
I'm so sorry to hear about her own loss, Mr. Speaker, and I want to assure her that, of course, I can't imagine there'll be any chair of the inquiry or any terms of reference that we could devise that wouldn't include looking back at the state of preparedness before COVID actually struck this country.
Cleethorpes, like other resorts, is heavily reliant on the coach industry to bring tourists into the resort. And though the support for the industry has been very welcome, there have been one or two anomalies, and some coach operators in my constituency and elsewhere have been designated as tourism operators rather than coach operators, which meant they didn't qualify for some of the financial support. Could my right honourable friend look again at this and perhaps arrange for a meeting with me and representatives from my industry and constituency to meet with the Transport Secretary so that we can see whether any additional help is available?
As ever, my honourable friend makes what sounds like an excellent point about coach operators and tourist operators. I'll make sure he sees the relevant Transport Minister as soon as possible.
Thomas.
Nurseries are a vital part of community infrastructure, helping our youngest get a better chance at a good start to life and making it easier for parents to go to work. Given that over 300 shut their doors for good in February and March, will the Prime Minister publish a COVID recovery plan for nurseries and early years providers to help them get them back on their feet?
Mr. Speaker, will be publishing a very comprehensive plan for educational recovery very shortly.
Stephen Mack.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome today's announcements of both an inquiry and the memorial? But can I also welcome the extraordinary progress that has been made that has allowed us to further lift restrictions? However, there are still many individuals, charities, organisations and businesses that are still not confident to commit to further public events. Will my right honourable friend therefore consider a COVID indemnity scheme that will cover the costs of any last-minute cancellations that may occur due to ongoing restrictions to allow the planning of events to continue to avoid a second year of cancellations?
I thank my honourable friend for raising this, and I understand exactly why he says it. I think the best thing I can tell him is that we want to proceed with the caution and the certainty that we have done so far, and I believe that all the evidence I've seen at the moment suggests that we will be able to continue our reopenings, and that the businesses that have done so much to get ready should be able to plan on that basis.
Christian Mathers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome much of the Prime Minister's statement, although I concur with my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, that the sooner we can get the terms of reference and invite evidence from those who are able to give it, the better. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister said that the end of the lockdown is not the end of the pandemic, and he's absolutely right. There are some sectors of the economy which will suffer from a longer time lag. Travel and tourism, aviation and therefore aerospace manufacturing. Can I urge the government to give support in the longer term to these sectors, because they will be affected long after the rest of us are trying to get back to normal?
He's making an important point, but my strong view is that the best thing possible for all those sectors, including aviation, is to try to cautiously to make sure that we get through the roadmap and allow their businesses to grow again. And that is, I think, the single best solution, the best long-term, the best medium-term solution.
Mr.
Speaker, thank you, and I warmly welcome the Prime Minister's statement and this inquiry. As our fantastic vaccination programme continues to be rolled out, and as our vaccination continues to be effective against all mutant strains and other countries catch up, will the Prime Minister look at widening the green list of countries that travel is permitted to? Will he also ensure that the airports have the resources from border control and digitisation to deal with more passengers? And can he also warmly encourage President Biden, when he sees him next month in Cornwall, that other Americans would like to come over to this great country, and indeed we'd like to go over to theirs?
Yeah, well, he's making a very good point about the United States of America, and we're on that issue with our American friends. But I think people have to recognise, Mr. Speaker, that we still are at risk of importing new variants into this country. We've seen the arrival of B1.617.2, Mr. Speaker, and we must be cautious. And I can tell him that on that basis, the green list, and there's already some countries on the green list, as he knows, very attractive looking destinations as far as I can see, but that list is going to be subject to review every 3 weeks.
Dave Dugan.
Many thanks, Mr. Speaker. Last summer, COVID was almost fully suppressed in Scotland, and on current trends, it looks like we're heading in that direction cautiously again. However, as international travel reopens, I know that many in my constituency are very concerned about new strains entering the country. So while our First Minister has welcomed the UK Government's current very cautious approach to travel, she won't sign up to any plans that might put Scotland's progress at risk. So will the Prime Minister confirm today what happens in the event that devolved nations' strategic ambitions are at odds with the UK Government's? How is compromise in that scenario reached that isn't simply England's way or the highway?
Well, I think if I may say, I think that the cooperation, levels of cooperation, in spite of the differences which are sometimes accentuated or emphasised for whatever reason, has been amazing. And if you look at what's happening in Scotland today, it's very close to what's happening in the rest of the UK. That's the level of cooperation that we're showing together.
Sir Ed Woodley.
Right at the end of his statement, the Prime Minister echoed the words of his predecessor, Sir Winston Churchill, in saying, "Let us go forwards together." Of course, 80 years ago, precisely, on the 12th of May 1941, his predecessor was standing right there in this devastated chamber and committed ourselves to freedoms in the future. But in that spirit, may I ask a practical question about the future? Just as we had compulsory ID cards in the war and they worked so successfully, would the Prime Minister acknowledge that if we'd had them now, the whole test and trace system would have worked superbly? They could be made to work in future. For instance, on your smartphone, it'd be clear that you'd been vaccinated or whether you'd been in touch with infections. All this is very interesting for the future. Now, my right honourable friend can't give a definitive answer now, but would he at least have an open mind about how we can deal with these pandemics in the future?
Well, I'm a long-standing admirer of the libertarian school of thought that I've generally associated with my right honourable friend. But he's making an interesting point. about data, Mr. Speaker, and the importance of being able to access data fast and to help people. I think perhaps the idea of ID cards is a slightly different one, if I may respectfully suggest to him, and I think that we're still some way off that solution.
Right, let's head to Tim Farron. Tim.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As has been acknowledged already, it is Mental Health Awareness Week, and it's right that we note the huge impact of the COVID pandemic on the mental health, especially of our young people, and on their education. Will the Prime Minister then reconsider whether imposing a summer of cramming is really the wisest thing to force on students and teachers? And would he instead look at our outdoor education centres, many of which are based in Cumbria, of course, and who have been hit worse than pretty much any other part of the entire economy? And would he therefore agree to not just save outdoor education centres, but to deploy outdoor education by commissioning professionals from that sector to run an ambitious programme in schools and in outdoor settings to re-engage young people with a love of learning and to help to tackle the mental health crisis?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't think a summer of cramming is exactly how I would describe the programme for educational recovery that we have. It's very generous, it's broad-based, it's intended to help students, pupils, kids across the whole spectrum of abilities and to help them to make up the detriment to their learning. But can I say how warmly I welcome Cumbria's outdoor education approach, the alfresco learning that he supports. It sounds magnificent to me, Mr. Speaker, and I think it should be replicated across the entire country. And I look forward to hearing more about it.
Mark.
Mr. Speaker, I can just say to the Prime Minister that other venues are available, and the Forest of Dean would be fantastically keen to join in offering itself for outdoor education for children across the United Kingdom. I welcome what the Prime Minister said about being able to say more at the end of this month about relaxing all restrictions by the 21st of June, and he'll know I'll welcome that. But can I just take him to what he said in his statement about the winter? It's inevitable, I think, that we'll see an increase in COVID, as with other respiratory viruses, and there will be some increase in hospitalisations and deaths, although because of our incredible vaccination rollout and the effectiveness of our vaccines, that will be at a much lower level and one that will not overwhelm the National Health Service. So can he confirm that work is underway in government to make sure that even with that small increase because of the success of our vaccinations, that we'll learn to live with the consequences of COVID as we do with flu, and we won't need to shut down the country again in the winter?
Mr. Speaker, there is plainly a difference, as my right honourable friend understands very well, between a disease such as flu, which sadly causes every year a number of hospitalisations and death, perhaps in the thousands, and a disease which has the potential to replicate, to spread exponentially, and to overwhelm the NHS. And what we need to be absolutely certain of, Mr. Speaker, is that we're right in thinking that we've broken the connection between COVID transmission and hospitalisation or serious illness and death. And that's still the question that we really need to establish in the weeks and months ahead. I'm optimistic about it, Mr. Speaker, but that is I think the key issue. And I just want to make one point I should have said earlier to my old friend behind me about weddings, Mr. Speaker. It's very important that for the purposes of the bans, we will be making an announcement within 28 days, as it were, of June the 21st, if you follow me, Mr. Speaker.
Let's go to Afzal Khan. Afzal.
Mr. Speaker, the Israeli government made the decision not to vaccinate more than 4.5 Palestinian citizens in Gaza and the West Bank, leaving this responsibility to the occupied territories' under-resourced healthcare system. Only several thousand Palestinians have been vaccinated, in contrast to the 4.2 million Israelis. In light of the shocking and appalling scenes in Jerusalem, where Israeli forces attacked worshippers, the Holy Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the healthcare units, will the Prime Minister outline what steps the government is taking to provide assistance to the Palestinians in this difficult time? And will he condemn the actions of the Israeli forces and accept that the only way forward is a two-state solution to ensure peace health equality and protection of human rights.
It is a statement that the Prime Minister made, but I'm sure he would like to answer the question.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Well, he makes a fair point about the situation in Israel, and I must say that I'm deeply concerned by what we're seeing, and everybody is deeply concerned in this House by the scenes that we're seeing. I think we all want to see urgent de-escalation by both sides, and let me tell him that the position of this government is firmly behind his, in that we continue to believe that a two-state solution is the best way forward.
Simon Fell, are you ready?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's announcement about a public inquiry. Mr. Speaker, when COVID first rolled into Barrow-in-Furness, we had a disproportionate impact from it due to a toxic mix of underlying health conditions. With that in mind, could the Prime Minister confirm that the inquiry will take a look at not just the actions the government did or didn't take, but also what we need to do to make sure we can build back healthier out of this pandemic?
Actually, I think he makes an extremely good point, my own friend. It's a very important point. And I hope that this is what they call a big teachable moment for the entire country about our obesity, about our fitness levels, about disparities across public provision, not just between affluent areas, but within regions of the country. The levelling up needs to take place, Mr. Speaker, and that's why that is the ambition of this government.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Speaker. And can I welcome the Prime Minister's announcement of an inquiry as well. It is important because of the number of people who died, but also because of the millions of people who will live with the consequences of the policies adopted by ministers on the advice of their chief medical officers. Many people who have lost their lives because hospitals and surgeries were closed, people whose businesses were wrecked because of stop-go lockdowns, children whose education has been disrupted, affecting their life chances. And at the same time, there were many credible experts who questioned the modelling on which those policies were based, the impact that it had on the poor, and also the appropriateness of the actions and the consistency of the actions. Can the Prime Minister assure us that the inquiry will include listening to the views and examining the views of those experts and the issues which they have raised?
Well, I think he's only serving to underline, with his excellent points, the extreme difficulty of the decisions that governments in this country and around the world were forced to make, and the terrible balances that we had to strike. And I'm sure that the considerations that he raises will be looked at by the inquiry.
Lizzie Buchan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to congratulate my right honourable friend on the huge success of the vaccine rollout. The economy in central London is hurting, partly because of the lack of commuters and partly because of the lack of international visitors. Can my right honourable friend confirm that the plan is to lift the work-at-home guidance as of June the 21st, providing we stay on track?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, that is certainly our intention, provided we stay on track. But you should, I want to be sure that people will wait until we're able to say that with more clarity a bit later on, because we must be guided by what's happening with the pandemic. And she's so right about London and the dynamism of London, and indeed any other of our great cities. They do depend on people to be able to have confidence to go to work. I think it will come back. I think it could come back remarkably quickly, but it does depend on keeping the virus down. Madam Deputy Speaker, forgive me.
We now go to Debbie Abrahams.
Madam Deputy Speaker, on the 22nd of February, the Prime Minister told the House that the PPE contracts are there on the record for everybody to see, and all the details are on the record. But what the Prime Minister told Parliament was not true. A large number of contracts were neither there for everybody to see or on the record, including a £23 million contract to Bunzl, which was not published until the 8th of March. The Ministerial Code states it is of paramount importance that ministers give accurate and truthful information to Parliament, correcting any inadvertent errors. So will the Prime Minister finally apologise to the House and the country for this misleading statement and ensure that the government's procurement practices during the pandemic are in the scope of the COVID inquiry?
I'm sure the Honourable Lady means inadvertently misleading. Prime Minister.
I'm sure she does, Mr. Speaker.
James Davis.
Deputy Speaker, as life continues to return towards normality and attention turns to how we can learn lessons from the pandemic, there remains an urgent need to tackle this country's problem with obesity. Following the Queen's speech, what reassurances can my right honourable friend give me that the government will continue to pursue this agenda with vigour?
Yes. I can give my own friend who is a doctor every possible assurance, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think that this is a struggle that many of us face, but we are, I'm afraid, one of the fattest countries in Europe, if not the fattest. And we have to, and that has medical consequences, and it is extremely costly, both medically and financially.
We now go to Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In November, the Prime Minister, in response to my question on funding for charities through COVID-19, said in this chamber, and I quote, "We will be doing much more over the winter to support the voluntary sector." He has delivered nothing, absolutely nothing over the winter. Now 10 billion in debt, tens of thousands of jobs have gone, charities are scaling back and closing, and our communities are suffering. So will he tell the House why he made that empty promise and what he will not just say, but do to support our charities now at this critical time?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we've had huge support for businesses of all kinds, premises, cuts in business rates, Madam Deputy Speaker, cuts in VAT, furloughing, and the single best thing we can do for charities is getting non-essential retail opened again as we did, and allowing our economy to come back. And I think that the British people give huge amounts to charity. We're one of the most generous countries in the world, and I've no doubt that instinct has been there throughout this pandemic and will continue.
Now go to Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The NHS in Kirklees has now given over 50% of people who have been vaccinated their second dose. Will the Prime Minister join me in thanking our local NHS, GPs, community pharmacies, and the wonderful volunteers at my local Honley Vaccination Centre who have all played a magnificent part in this superb effort, which now means we can proceed to the next step of the roadmap on Monday?
Yes, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to thank everybody who's been involved in the vaccine rollout, and particularly those at the Honley Vaccination Centre.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee published a report last September that recommended the government should announce the inquiry into the response to the coronavirus immediately to allow time to set up the Secretariat and other administrative functions, which should mean it could start taking evidence early next year. So that was 8 months ago. So I wish to support the comments made by my honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, that the statutory public inquiry should be set up as soon as possible before spring 2022. So may I also seek the assurances from the Prime Minister that a key element of the terms of reference will be to investigate why there was a disproportionate impact on our Black, Asian and other ethnic minority communities, and that any chair of the inquiry has an expert reference panel that is diverse and has community leaders involved.
I agree with her totally about the need to establish those facts and the impact on Black and minority ethnic groups, and what was driving that, what could have been done to mitigate that, and I'm sure that the inquiry will be suitably set up so as to address that amongst many, many other issues.
We now go to Bob Blackman.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend will be well aware of the tremendous success of the vaccine programme in Harrow. Indeed, he visited the Hive vaccination centre very early on during the vaccination programme. What message does my right honourable friend have now for younger people who will be approaching the position whereby they'll be called for their vaccination so that we can ensure that all adults are vaccinated by the end of July?
I thank my honourable friend, because he's totally right. That's, I think, one of the key messages all of us in this House should be transmitting to adults, and they're getting younger and younger now, the groups that we're reaching. Come forward when you're asked, get your vaccine. You won't feel a thing. It's absolutely vital. It's not just good for you, it's good for the whole country. So get it done.
Now go to Peter Grant.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Earlier on, the Right Honourable Member, the Chair of the Health Select Committee, raised the question of recruitment and retention of medical staff. But throughout the entire health and social care sectors, we could be about to see a big increase in the numbers of staff leaving, either because they delayed their retirement in order to stay on and help until the worst of the crisis was over, or in some cases because they're simply burnt out with the stress they've been working under for so long. So what specific plans does the government have to increase recruitment and retention of staff across the entire spectrum of health and social care professions?
We've actually, Madam Deputy Speaker, got 60,000 nurses in training. And I'm reading every day about the enthusiasm with which people now want to go into that wonderful profession. We've got, I think, 11,000 more nurses this year than last year, and we're investing massively in social care to make sure that our older people are looked after properly, and that there's much more. One of the reasons that we'll be bringing forward plans for reform of social care is I want to see proper join-up between health and social care, and we haven't, at the moment we don't have that as a country, and we need it.
We now go to Duncan Baker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Times reported at the weekend that there are 120,000 people who are immunocompromised, for instance those having treatment for cancer. For them, the effectiveness of the vaccine is still unknown. What safety and reassurances can my right honourable friend give to those worried and anxious, clinically extremely vulnerable, as we continue to unlock?
Prime Minister.
He's totally right, my honourable friend's totally right to raise the immunocompromised and their continuing anxiety. The risks continue to diminish, as he knows. I think today 1 in 1,340 are estimated to have the virus. It's going down at the moment quite steeply, as I said earlier to the House. It's much lower than at any time since last summer or even before. But plainly, for those who are anxious, who are immunocompromised, they should continue to exercise, as I've said, caution and common sense in the way they go about their lives for some time to come.
Chris Bryant.
COVID has left tens of thousands of people in this country with problems which are remarkably similar to a brain injury. They're going to need long-term neurorehabilitation. When you add them into the 1.4 million people who before COVID came along had suffered from a brain injury, either from carbon monoxide poisoning or concussion in sport or stroke or a traumatic brain injury or fetal alcohol syndrome, that's a phenomenal financial and medical need. Can I urge the Prime Minister, there still isn't anybody in this country who takes sole charge of this area of brain injury. It's a hidden pandemic because you can't often see it in the person across the other side of the room that they're affected. Can he please, maybe he should meet with a group of us to talk about it, because it affects every single department of government, and I really want him to take it on so that all these people get the support that they need.
I'm really grateful to him, and I know that he was going to raise this with me yesterday. I hope he forgives me for not. I hope he forgives me for not allowing him to intervene, but entirely inadvertently. But he's raised an extremely important point. I believe that not only brain injury, he's right to raise 1.4 million, but also a brain cancer is an area that is too often neglected in our system, may fall through the cracks, and I certainly undertake to get him the meeting that he needs, whether it's with me or the relevant minister. I cannot currently promise, but he will get the meeting he needs.
Final question from Dr. Liam Fox.
Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, almost every human crisis produces advances in human innovation, and the COVID crisis has been no exception. We've seen in the UK what collaboration between academia and the private sector has done in terms of vaccine production. mRNA vaccines may turn out to be as important as antibiotics in dealing with global disease outbreaks. As soon as we're able to identify the genome of a virus, we will be able to move to rapid vaccine production, something we were unable to do before. What can we in the UK do, with our leadership of the G7 and our membership of the G20 and other international organisations do, to determine global protocols to enable us to be able to move forward in any future pandemic in a less chaotic way than we did on this occasion, and be able to develop global capacity for vaccine productions? Surely, if anything is a long-term and valuable legacy of global Britain, it would be this.
My right honourable friend, who's also a doctor, is completely right about, necessity the mother of invention, Madam Deputy. We've been driven by the pandemic to great feats of scientific genius, producing, as he rightly says, the mRNA vaccines at incredible speed, the AstraZeneca vaccine, and that has meant, the pandemic has meant that the abilities of this country alone to cope have hugely increased. We are now capable of producing vaccines for the finishing plants, the new VMIC that we have. We're invested in bioreactors across the country. We're much more resilient than we were, but we're also leading across the world in making sure that countries coordinate and work together on spotting zoonotic diseases earlier with the research hubs, making sure that we coordinate data, we share data much earlier, but also making sure there aren't the barriers that have sadly sprung up between countries to the sharing of supplies and of vaccines, so that we have secure supply chains around the world. So what the UK is doing is not only spending £548 million on COVAX, Madam Deputy Speaker, investing in vaccines around the world. I think we've given, 40 million vaccine doses to 117 countries that the UK has so far given. But we're also working on a global response to pandemics, and that will be one of the things that we do together at the G7, and it's supported by all the partner countries. So that's what we'll be doing.
I thank the Prime Minister for his statement, and I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes to make necessary arrangements for the next business.